Now, if we go back to the joint statement that they announced earlier, so there were some areas that, there was a lot of areas that were covered from denuclearization as well as a mentioning of the peace treaty.
Right.
They said they will cooperate in all areas. They will resume reunions of families before it's too late.
Right.
They will set up a liaison operation in Kaesong. What do you make of these proposals?
Well, I think they're all extremely serious. I think that what you said, the comment about before it's too late, which I guess was from President Moon, it is from the perspective of some Americans, of course, they would say that the denuclearization is the time-sensitive issue. So there's clearly a certain independence of thinking, right, to set forth a plan based on an inter-Korean consensus and to make that the driving force. I think, of course, the details are still to be worked out, but the mood and the environment obviously tried to create like a family-like environment between the two families in a way, and of course that represented a greater reconciliation. So I think it was quite successful at the symbolic level, and I guess I would come away from this thinking that some parts of it are irreversible. It doesn't just apply to nuclear weapons, right? There are irreversible changes in history and culture where you get a positive cycle towards cooperation. And it felt like a turning point. I'm not really sure what the next step will be. There may be other problems we haven't anticipated.
Now, the agreement was of global attention, obviously.
For sure.
International media are already reporting on it, and they're saying North Korea did decide to rid the peninsula of nuclear weapons, but they didn't mention how specifically they would do this.
Right.
Would this result in some kind of implication down the road?
Well, I think there can be no doubt. It's not stated explicitly anywhere in the declaration, but the North Korean position, I think, is quite clear. That North Korea is willing to go for denuclearization and limiting nuclear weapons eventually, but that this must be as part of some larger security guarantee for the region. Whether that has to do with the reduction of nuclear weapons and other conventional weapons overall in the region, or whether it has some other aspect to it, I don't know. That's the details we'll find out about later. But I think I certainly come away from listening to the declaration with the impression that if the next step is for the United States to say unconditionally Korea has to give up all nuclear weapons before any economic sanctions can be lifted, before we can have a change, that there will be a significant backlash not only in North Korea but in South Korea itself. So it's significant. It's significant.
So, in your perspective, was the agreement more or less expected, or was it more than average?
It was definitely more, in my opinion. That's the nuance. Again, I couldn't listen to Korean and English at the same time. But the nuance about the end of the war and peace treaty suggested going from an environment in which sort of security issues were dominant to one in which other forms of exchange and cooperation were possible. And that, I would say, is off script. If you had sat down with people from the White House and the Pentagon and discussed it, that certainly was not the agenda that they would have pushed for. It would have been one focused on denuclearization and North Korea joining the international community. We didn't really hear that here, right? It was more focused on the Koreans, the tragedy, the implied tragedy of separation, the sort of brothers coming together, or family coming together, and that had a tremendous emotional appeal, which I can fully understand. But there is some sort of risk of misunderstanding, right? If you go forward, that there'll be a counter-argument on the American side to say this is not what we agreed to. That part, I think, is going to require a lot of work on the Korean side and on the North Korean side as well, to convince people that the critical point, and I think this is totally logical, but it isn't necessarily accepted opinion, which is that the reduction of tensions and exchanges is the most appropriate step to move towards denuclearization and to make it the demand that total irreversible denuclearization is necessary before any exchanges can take place is a somewhat unrealistic position. I think, and this is just me reading it, that this joint declaration implies that both Koreas have basically taken this position. And the question will be whether the international community, and specifically the United States, will agree, at least with this direction, or at least agree that the Koreas should go forth together and work these problems out. I think that scenario in which we go in a positive direction, positive cycle, and the United States supports it is entirely possible, but it's not guaranteed.
So there was a lot of firsts this year. Now it's also the first time that the two leaders gave a joint statement after it came to an end. We're going to show you coverage of Yoon Young-chan of the Blue House official giving a statement.
The South and the North Koreas have agreed to go forward to eternal peace on the Korean Peninsula, and developing the inter-Korean ties is the will of our people. And one, the South and the North Korea agreed that and confirmed the principle that the destiny of our people shall be determined only by us, and also agreeing a complete implementation of the previously adopted inter-Korean declarations in order to transform the inter-Korean ties. Second, the South and the North will come up with active measures to implement the issues that have been agreed upon during the summit, and to hold high-level talks and other dialogue in the short future. 3. The South and the North will conduct close coordination, and in order to promote civil exchanges and cooperation, have agreed to set up an inter-Korean joint liaison office at the Kaesong area where officials from both parties will be present. 4. The South and the North will work to make the mood of reconciliation and unity, and will facilitate cooperation and exchanges in all areas and in all levels. Internally, taking the opportunity of the days that are meaningful for both Koreas, including June 15th, we will carry out joint ceremonies participated by the people of the government, National Assembly, political parties, local authorities, and civil organizations of the two Koreas. And externally, we have agreed to participate in international sports events together, including the 2018 Asian Games, in order to showcase our unity and skills techniques to the world. 5. In order to urgently solve humanitarian issues that have resulted from the division of the two Koreas, the two sides have agreed to hold inter-Korean Red Cross talks to solve related issues, including the reunion of the separated families. And most immediately, the two Koreas agreed to carry out the reunion of the separated families on August 15th. 6. The South and the North will actively carry out the projects agreed upon the October 4th declaration in order to build a balanced development of the nation's economy and co-prosperity. And primarily, the two Koreas agreed to connect the East Sea Line and Gyeonggi Line railways and roads, and to come up with measures to modernize and utilize them. 2. The South and the North will work towards alleviating acute military tension and work together to resolve the risk of a war. The two Koreas have agreed to completely halt all forms of hostilities, and we agreed that this has great impact on the lives of our people, and it is a very crucial one. 1. The South and the North have agreed to completely halt all forms of hostilities that become the cause for military tension and conflicts in all areas, including on ground, sea, and the air. From May 1st, in the military demarcation line area, the propaganda broadcast and propaganda flyers and all forms of hostilities will be put to a halt to make DMZ into a peace zone.
Number 2, the South and the North agreed to make areas around NLL on the West Sea to a peaceful marine zone and develop practical measures to prevent military conflict and to secure safe fishing activities. 3. The South and the North agreed to implement military security measures required for mutual cooperation and exchanges and to promote increased contacts. The South and the North agreed to hold defense ministerial talks and other military official talks to resolve any military issues arising between the two Koreas. As the first step, general-level military talks will be held in May. This is Number 3, the South and the North will actively cooperate to establish robust and everlasting peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Ending the current irregular armistice status on the peninsula and establishing a firm peace regime is a historical task that no longer may be postponed. Sub number 1, the South and the North reaffirm the commitment to non-aggression agreement when no form of armed forces are being used and also agreed to strictly adhere to the agreement. Sub number 2, the South and the North agreed to implement arms reduction once military tensions are alleviated and mutual military trust is established. 3. The South and the North declare the end of war this year, which marks the 65th year since the armistice agreement, shifting from armistice treaty to peace treaty. Thereby will actively promote the South Korea, North Korea, the U.S. three-party talks or South Korea, North Korea, U.S., China four-party talks to establish a robust and everlasting peace regime. 4. The South and the North have confirmed the joint objective of realizing a nuclear-free Korean peninsula through a complete denuclearization. The South and the North have shared the same view that the active measures taken by the North have great significance for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula and have agreed to carry out each of their responsibilities and roles. The South and the North will actively work for the support and cooperation with the International Society for the Denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The two leaders have agreed to often hold talks on grave issues that affect their people through regular summits and direct phone line to build trust, and have agreed to work towards improving inter-Korean ties and making a positive move for unification, peace, and prosperity of the Korean Peninsula. And President Moon will visit Pyongyang this fall. 2018 April 27, Panmunjom, President Moon Jae-in, Chairman Kim Jong-un.
The Panmunjom Declaration will be signed, and there will be a joint presentation.
Okay, so there we have it now. He just announced the details of what the agreement reached between the two Koreas, where now if we have a recap, the North and South confirmed that that their destiny should be determined by the two. Active measures will be implemented measures will be actively implemented in order for the two Koreas to implement their agreement, and then there will be close cooperation and civil exchanges between the two as well. So if we go back to the questions, so satisfactory, we can say it was a fruitful outcome out of today's summit.
Well, I think it's such an enormous content, and it's so broad that I almost feel like we're living in a different world now than we were a couple hours ago.
Of course.
So the full implications will take us a while to digest and fully understand. But I think maybe the most striking statement, and again, I don't know the original Korean, was they said, halt all forms of hostilities. So this goes much further than anything stated before to imply that there isn't really a need for some sort of military confrontation between North and South Korea. Or at least it would be understood like that by many ordinary citizens of North Korea and South Korea hearing this statement. So that would be a profound shift, because as we know, within the Ministry of Defense in South Korea, in the United States, of course, and in North Korea, the possibility of some sort of North-South military conflict has been at the center of policy for many decades. It has actually been many years since such a statement has been made. So I almost feel like we're back to like 1948, right? And the discussion about the future of the peninsula way back at the very beginning, right? With Kim Gu and Ro Yun-hyung and others. So we're at a critical historical moment. A whole range of possibilities has been laid out. Koreans have clearly seized the initiative here, and they've worked very hard on this, which I think they deserve the compliments and their appreciation for what must have been extremely difficult negotiations. But we also have to be realistic and understand that going forward in the international community in the United States and within Korea as well, there will be those who have other opinions, who need to be, to some degree, convinced and brought on board, and that the vision will have to be fleshed out in more detail. What specifically are we going to do? I mean, on the military talks, extremely important point, a very positive move forward. But if we go another step, we have to ask ourselves, what do the militaries of North and Korea do? I mean, what is their purpose? How will they develop forward? What are the security issues that we will face? There are answers, but they will require considerable amount of inspiration and imagination, and I think almost a spiritual sense of what is possible.
So for now, we can say that history has been made in terms of the agreement itself. So the two Koreas also agreed to implement all the compromises that they made in this agreement,
right,
as well as implement past agreements.
Going back all the way to Kim Dae-jung.
That's right. He
before.
mentioned
Yes.
previous agreements or declarations that were agreed upon in the past. Some experts have said because the Inter-Korean Summit was held relatively in the early stages of President Moon Jae-in's presidency,
right,
he has more time to overlook whether these promises are being kept.
Right.
They also said President Moon will be making a trip to Pyongyang in fall. So do you see developments going in the positive direction?
Well, we could say that President Moon Jae-in has been luckier than other presidents on all sides. So on the Korean side, we have South Korea. Excuse me. On the South Korean side, there's a certain consensus building out of the whole candlelight vigils that has built a certain consensus around him among many people. In North Korea, you have a new leader who obviously wants to go in a new direction and has a certain sort of self-confidence to try and change North Korea. In the case of the United States, in the case of the Trump administration, we all know Donald Trump at the beginning said he'd be happy to have a hamburger with Kim Jong-un. Donald Trump is rather unpredictable, so I don't want to say what he's going to do or what the response will be. He goes between different extremes. However, because the Trump administration is in a somewhat weak position and they have a lot of other things on their plate in the Middle East and elsewhere, there is this sort of like a window there for some potential move forward. And in that respect, I'd like to maybe come back to the Pyeongchang Olympics, which was the beginning of this process. Pyeongchang Olympics sort of emphasized common culture with the opening ceremony, and several commentators have made this note, which I think